Hello, welcome once again to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis. And today we are continuing our Album of the Year series. This is episode 3, so we're doing 1985 to 1994. A quick catch up for anybody who has missed either of the first two episodes. Episode 1, we did 65 to 74. Last week we did 75 to 84, so today 85 to 94. See how it works. And what I'm doing here is I am, for each year, nominating what I think is the album of the year. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the album of the year is the best album of the year, although these are all A-plus efforts. They're all rock solid and they are among the best albums recorded that year. I'm not saying it's necessarily my favorite album of the year, although these are all among my favorites. What I'm saying is that if you want to understand music the way I understand it, if you want to get a sense of what my taste in music is like, what sets me apart from other people, these are the albums that you have to listen to. These are the albums that in some way outline the area that my taste covers. Cool? Cool. As always, before we start talking about anything that has anything to do whatever with relative quality, we have to talk about the subjectivity notice. Here at Papa Nick's Music, we firmly believe that there is no such thing as objectively good art. There is only art that we like. And as long as you keep that in mind, this is a wonderful conversation. It's entertaining, it's informative, it's our opportunity to see the world from somebody else's perspective, which I would argue is always a good thing. The conversation goes off the rails real quick, though, when somebody in that conversation insists on being seen as objectively right. So, I am not making objective claims here. I'm not saying my album of the year is objectively anything other than an album that was released in that year. So if you would refrain from making objective claims in the comments, I would appreciate it. This, by the way, is not my sneaky, underhanded way of trying to squelch conversation. If you disagree with me, by all means, drop that note down below. I always enjoy having that conversation. It's just, as soon as you tell me that I'm objectively wrong, that's when I'm clocking out, and I'm not really paying attention to what you have to say. Cool? Cool. Okay. That may be the quickest I've ever done an intro to a video before. Bodes well for the runtime this week. Starting off 1985. Okay, like last week, I'm going to give you some albums for each year. I'm going to give you some albums that I have to mention them. All right, they're not just honorable mentions. They are, according to the line or the column header on my spreadsheet, they are gotta mentions. I have to mention these albums, and then I'm going to give you 3 runners-up, and then finally my album of the year. For 1985, I've got 2 gotta mentions. The Greg Kihn Band released Citizen Kihn in 1985, although I'm fairly certain it was just credited to Greg Kihn. Could be wrong on that, and I don't want to look it up. John Cougar Mellencamp released Scarecrow in 1985 as well. Both fantastic albums. But when it comes to determining my album of the year for 1985, my third runner-up is the much maligned 1985 eponymous release by The Beach Boys, their mid-80s album titled The Beach Boys. I loved this album when it came out. I still love it. I think it's one of their stronger albums. A lot of Beach Boys fans don't much care for it. They tinted in most of the album. They replaced Dennis with a drum machine, and that soured a lot of people on the Beach Boys. But I think it's a great album. Carl has never sounded better. It's a fantastic album. My second runner-up was an album that I just overlooked at the time. I had a copy of it because I bought a used copy of it at the used record store that I liked to go to when I was in college, but I never really listened to it for one reason or another. And then earlier this year, last year, sometime in the not horribly distant past, I did an album ranking of the Alan Parsons Project, and then finally listened to their 1985 album, Vulture Culture, and oh my God, is that a good album. So my second runner-up for 1985, Alan Parsons Project with Vulture Culture. My first runner-up that almost made it, I had this slotted in for my album of the year until I realized there was another album that was released in that same year that I had overlooked. And that, my first runner-up is Stanley Jordan's debut album, Magic Touch. Oh my God, this thing blew my socks off when it was released. Stanley Jordan was a highly innovative for his time guitarist who played tapping the fretboard rather than strumming. He would occasionally strum, but mostly he's tapping the fretboard, which allowed him to do bass and a bass line or backing chords with a melody line with his right hand. He tried to play the guitar the way he played the piano. And still to this day, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in concert. Actually went to see Stanley Jordan several years ago here in the San Antonio area, and he had a guitar on a stand that was next to his next to a piano. And as he was playing a song, he would play the piano with one hand and then the guitar with the other. So he's playing chords on the piano and tapping out a melody on the guitar. And then halfway through the song, he switched to where he was playing, and it was just that you could play one song on two instruments and then halfway through switch the instrument. That blew my mind. Amazing guitarist. I love Stanley Jordan, and that first album is fantastic. But my album of the year, another guitarist that I extremely fond of, Chet Atkins. And in 1985 he released Stay Tuned, which is mostly an album of duets. He's playing with other guitarists. He does a couple of songs with George Benson. He does one, maybe two with Mark Knopfler. We've got Steve Lukather on here. And it's all wonderful music. The only thing that sounds really dated to my ear is the Steve Lukather contribution, because he's playing very much an 80s distorted guitar, like he plays virtually everything he ever does. But it's a wonderful album. Strongly recommend Stay Tuned by Chet Atkins. It's my favorite second favorite Chet Atkins album. So love Stay Tuned. 1986. In 1986, we've got several gotta mentions. Bruce Hornsby with The Way It Is. Chet Atkins with Street Dreams. Huey Lewis Band with Four. Chris Rea with On the Beach. Linda Ronstadt for Sentimental Reasons. But if we're talking about album of the year, my third runner-up, not too long ago I did my Paul McCartney ranking and expressed my undying affection for his 1986 release, Press to Play. I really like Press to Play, and that's my third runner-up. My second runner-up is Electric Light Orchestra's Balance of Power, an underrated album. All of their 80s albums were underrated, but I think Balance of Power is especially more so. Also in 1986, the only Moody Blues album that I think I really like, The Other Side of Life. I know. I should like the Days of Future Past, and it's okay. It's just not one of my favorites. But The Other Side of Life, man, I loved that album. But my favorite album, or not my favorite album, my album of the year for 1986 is actually my favorite of all of these, and that is Joe Jackson's Big World. Big World was, I mentioned last week, I think. Yeah, it was last week. Joe Jackson would change something up every year, right? I had Body and Soul last week was one of my albums of the year. And for that, he changed the way the setting of the recording. He recorded it in a concert venue to get the natural reverb from the hall. Well, this one he recorded live, but made an effort to reduce the crowd noise. Right? They told the crowd to be as quiet as they could while the song was playing. When they were done with the song and somebody said, "Okay, cut," then they could clap or whistle or fart or whatever they wanted to do. But they were playing this live to an audience. It was mixed live. It's like a concert, and oh my God, is this thing good? It was also unusual because it came out as a double album, but it only had 1.5 sides. Side 4 was a blank side. I played it just to make sure it was blank, and yes, it was blank. So, Joe Jackson's Big World, album of the year, 1986. 1987. My gotta mentions for 1987 are Chris Isaak's self-titled Chris Isaak, Joe Jackson's Willpower, his first instrumental album, Fleetwood Mac released Tango in the Night. In the compilation slash re-release slash packaging of old archival material that I normally wouldn't talk about if I'm, like ranking albums of an artist, but it's worth talking about here. The Monkees released Missing Links, the first volume of their Rarities series. Supertramp released Free as a Bird, which I was completely unaware of at the time, but I kind of like it now. Chris Rea released Dancing with Strangers. So we've got a lot of good albums in here. But my third runner-up for Album of the Year 1987 is Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason. I like the David Gilmour, non-Roger Waters era Pink Floyd stuff because I am a Pink Floyd fan for David Gilmour. That's the person that I want to listen to. He is the creative force that I like. So Momentary Lapse of Reason is a good album as far as I'm concerned. My second runner-up is Bruce Springsteen's Tunnel of Love, an album that's spotty. I mean, it's hit and miss. When it's good, it's really, really good. When it's not, it's kind of bland, and there are songs that I will skip, not because they irritate me. It's just there's something better further on that I want to get to. But the stuff that's good is really, really good. I like Tunnel of Love. My first runner-up for 1987 is John Cougar Mellencamp's The Lonesome Jubilee, which is just a stellar album. One of his better albums. But my album of the year, finally, I've mentioned him at least once in a prior year. He's one of my favorite songwriters, and I finally get to give him an album of the year. In 1987, Warren Zevon released Sentimental Hygiene, and oh my goodness, do I love this album. Everything about this album is fantastic. It's great. The songwriting is top-notch. The performances are good. We've got a nice mix of ballads and up-tempo numbers. Fantastic. Sentimental Hygiene. If you've not listened to it, give it a listen. You're going to love it. Trust me, you'll thank me later. 1988. In 1988, we've got, as far as the stuff that I have to mention, we've got the Cowboy Junkies Trinity Sessions. A friend loaned that to me, and I listened to it, and I just loved it. And part of me was hoping that my friend intended this to be a gift, and though my friend a few weeks later asked for it back, so I gave it back. I really liked it, but I'll be honest, I never actually went out and bought my own copy of it, so take that with a grain of salt. Joe Jackson's live album, Live 1980 to 86, was released in 88, and oh my goodness, is that a great live album. Joe Jackson also released his soundtrack to the Francis Ford Coppola movie Tucker. Never seen the movie, but the soundtrack is good. Never seen the movie because I'm not a big fan of Francis Ford Coppola. Maybe that's a talk for another day. Mike and the Mechanics released their album Living Years in 1988 as well. So there's a lot of good stuff coming out in 88. For me, though, the third runner-up when it comes to deciding what is my album of the year is the Beatles. The Beatles? Yes, the Beatles. In 1988, they released Past Masters. I love the Past Masters, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 2 especially because it's the album release that has You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, which is one of my favorite Beatles songs. So, yeah, third runner-up, Beatles with Past Masters. Second runner-up, we've got Traveling Wilburys with Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Lynne. I'm a huge fan of Tom Petty. I'm a huge fan of the Beatles and George Harrison. I'm not much of a fan of Bob Dylan, and I'm mediocre on Roy Orbison. But man, put these guys in a room together, and it is wonderful. Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 was my second runner-up. My first runner-up was the long-awaited, much-anticipated, and fairly highly regarded solo debut album of Brian Wilson, his self-titled solo debut. And while Brian Wilson is a good album, I think his later solo releases are a little bit better, a little bit more, consistent. Brian himself was a little bit less mentally contradictory, for lack of a better word. He was in better shape later on. But still, Brian Wilson is a good album. It's got a lot of really good bits on it. But as far as I'm concerned, the album of the year, once again, we're going with Randy Newman. Land of Dreams, a quasi-autobiographical album. He talks a lot about his youth. but you can't trust anything that he says. He's making stuff up as he goes. But still, it's a wonderful album. A lot of good songwriting on Land of Dreams. One of his better albums. Not his best, but one of his better albums. 1989. Okay, in 1989, we've got some really good stuff. This is, out of all of these years, the one where I have the most gotta mentions. We've got Elvis Costello's Spike, one of my favorite Elvis Costello albums. We've got Don Henley's The End of the Innocents. I Can't Stand Still. I mentioned that last week, and I mentioned End of the Innocents this week. I'm skipping over Building the Perfect Beast. Read into that what you will. Warren Zevon released Transverse City. Very good album. Joe Jackson released Blaze of Glory. Paul McCartney released Flowers in the Dirt. And Monty Python released Monty Python Sings. Music performances from their shows and movies. Love Monty Python music. But when it comes to Album of the Year, my third runner-up, one of my favorite Billy Joel albums, Stormfront. I think it's a much stronger album than most Billy Joel album. I think it's a much stronger album than most Billy Joel fans do. That was harder to say. The difficulty of saying that outweighed the value of even trying to say it in the first place. I think it's underrated, but I love Stormfront. My second runner-up, and from second up through Album of the Year, we've got razor-thin margins here. I almost made my Album of the Year Chris Isaak's Heart-Shaped World. I'm a big fan of Chris Isaak. You know, one of the criticisms of Chris Isaak is that all of his songs sound the same, and no, they don't. That just means you don't listen to Chris Isaak. But this was the album that was his breakthrough album. It had the hit Wicked Game on it, and it is a stellar album. I mean, front to back, very good. No skippers, no bad songs. You know, throw a dart, and you'll land on a good song on Heart-Shaped World. My first runner-up was is the album The Road to Hell by Chris Rea. I like Chris Rea. I like him a lot. I liked him when he first had his first top 40 hit in 79, I guess, something in that neighborhood, with Fool If You Think It's Over. I liked that song when it was out on the radio, and then didn't hear much about him for up until the early 2000s, when I was living in an outlying area that was close enough to Houston to get Houston radio stations. And one of the DJs at one of the stations that I listened to, the classic rock station that I listened to, was fond of playing the song Texas off of The Road to Hell. And I really liked that song a lot. And it was tracking down the album that had that song that I finally realized, this is the same guy who did that other song, and this album is really good. And that's what started me listening to and appreciating Chris Rea as a guitarist and as a singer. I think he's actually a very good singer. But Road to Hell, strongly recommended. But when it comes to Album of the Year, I've got to go with John Mellencamp's, I would argue his best album, Big Daddy. As much as I like The Lonesome Jubilee, Big Daddy is like 4 notches better song for song in terms of the songwriting here. I think this is John Mellencamp's best songwriting effort out of all of his albums. Wonderful album. Love Big Daddy. Which brings us to 1990. With 1990, I've got 3 albums that I have to mention. The Elvis Costello compilation, Girls, 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 where he's picking, it's not really a best of, it's a Elvis Costello picking songs that he wants you to pay attention to from his earlier albums. But it's a good compilation. I really like it. We've got the Hindu Love Gods, which is Warren Zevon singing with the members of REM minus Michael Stipe. We've got to mention it. We've got to mention it. The debut album from Wilson Phillips. I think Wilson Phillips is a convenient target for hipster sneering. The people who are the rock intelligentsia are going to look down their nose at Wilson Phillips. But there's some good songs on there, and these young ladies could sing, so I like Wilson Phillips. But when it comes to Album of the Year, my third runner-up is the second volume of Missing Links by the Monkees. My second runner-up is Traveling Wilburys Volume 3 from the Traveling Wilburys. So, I mean, we've got... It's not too hard to predict those are coming. My first runner-up that, you know, I briefly considered for Album of the Year is Chet Atkins and Mark Knopfler's Neck and Neck. I've made it clear from the get-go that I'm a big fan of Chet Atkins. I really like Mark Knopfler a lot, and if you put the two of them together, you've got a wonderful album. And Neck is a really good album. A lot of good guitar work on that album. But my Album of the Year was not a difficult call. I'm a huge fan of ELO, and oh my God, I was so happy when Jeff Lynne finally released an honest-to-God solo album. Armchair Theater, I think, is brilliant. The musical performances are good. The songwriting is good. The sound of it is good. He's playing most of the instruments as he was doing with ELO. I love Armchair Theater. Great album. My Album of the Year for 1990. Okay, 1991. In 1991, we had a couple of albums that came out that had fairly big popularity. Toad the Wet Sprocket released their album Fear. Pretty good album. Tom Petty released Into the Great Wide Open. Pretty good album. John Mellencamp released Whenever We Wanted. This is the first album that was released by John Mellencamp. He finally dropped the Cougar. Warren Zevon released Mr. Bad Example. So we, artists that I've been referring to, although this is my first reference to Toad the Wet Sprocket. So we've got a lot of stuff that you would think, okay, yeah, Nick's going to like that. But when it comes to Album of the Year, my third runner-up for 1991 is one of those albums that the intelligentsia like to look down their nose at, and that is Pocketful of Kryptonite by the Spin Doctors. It's happy music, and it is stellar musicianship. Sign me up for the Spin Doctors. Look down your nose at me if you want to. My second runner-up is, again, we've got Chris Rea, this time with his album Auberge. Wonderful album. My first runner-up, Joe Jackson again. He released Laughter and Lust. This was pretty much his last attempt to find pop success to match what he had had earlier in his career with Is She Really Going Out With Him and Stepping Out. Man, it took me that long to come up with the name of that. I had to play it until I got to the chorus. That's a bad sign. And Laughter and Lust is a wonderful album. It's a really good pop album. I really like Laughter and Lust. But when it comes to my Album of the Year of 1991, I have to go with a dark horse. This is an album that I'm willing to bet most of you watching this video have never heard of. It's by a band that most of you watching this video have never heard of. Most of you who are watching this video will have only heard of this album and or this band because I've referred to them in previous videos. I'm pretty sure I am one of the few remaining fans of the band The Friendly Indians. The Friendly Indians were a Southern California power pop band, and oh my God, their album Pure Genius, their follow-up to their not particularly successful Greetings from Lake Dolores. Pure Genius is a wonderful album. It is one of my all-time favorite albums. This is the case where I'm picking the album that is my favorite of the year. I love this album. And I'm putting it as Album of the Year because this is indicative of my taste. This album is available on the major streaming services. If you go and you listen to it, just listen to like 10-15 seconds of each song. Just skip through, and you're going to know why I love this album. Oh, I cannot say enough good things about Pure Genius by the Friendly Indians. Good songwriting, good sense of humor to most of the songs, excellent musicianship. Love everything about Pure Genius by the Friendly Indians. My Album of the Year, 1991. 1992. Okay, so gotta mentions include Bruce Springsteen released 2 albums in 1992. Same day he released Human Touch and Lucky Town. I went out and bought both of them on the same day. I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know if I have either one in my collection anymore. Of the two, if I've kept one and if I ever desire to replace one, if I did get rid of both of them. I didn't check before I started filming. Of the two, I preferred Human Touch, but you know, they made a pretty big splash because, he's releasing 2 albums on the same day. Whoever does that. 1992 also saw the release of Mary Chapin Carpenter's Come On, Come On, which was a fantastic album. An album that I never would have listened to had I not been married at the time to my first wife. But she was a fan of that kind of music. And so she bought it and she listened to it and I overheard it and I came to really love it. So kudos to my first wife for introducing me to Mary Chapin Carpenter. There's a tangent here. I'm going to leave it alone. When it comes to album of the year, though, third runner-up, Chris Rea, once again, with God's Great Banana Skin. Oh my God, I love God's Great Banana Skin. Second runner-up is Lindsey Buckingham with Out of the Cradle. I like Lindsey Buckingham a lot, and this was a strong album. My first runner-up, oh man, talk about people who are finally releasing solo albums, and why did it take this? All right, we mentioned Brian Wilson earlier, mentioned Jeff Lynne earlier. 1992 was the year that Brian May released a solo album, Back to the Light, and oh my God, do I adore that album. And very strongly considered it for album of the year, because if you want to understand why I like music, you've got to understand Brian May. But ultimately, I decided to go with the debut album from Bare Naked Ladies, Gordon. I'm a huge Bare Naked Ladies fan. I first became aware of Bare Naked Ladies several years after, we're talking several years after this release, when Brian Wilson, which originally appeared on this album, was released as a single off of their Rock Spectacle live album. And I heard that, I actually saw a video of that, and thought, oh, I like the sound of this band. I want to track this down. I got Rock Spectacle and loved it. And from that point on, every time, I immediately went and backfilled, and I've been keeping up with them ever since. It has been hard the last few releases because they're starting to slip. But, man, this is fantastic music. Talk about everything I was just saying about the Friendly Indians. Great musicianship, good, fantastic songwriting with a good sense of humor. This is a fun album. They are a fun band, and I will never apologize for being a fan of Bare Naked Ladies. So, album of the year 1992, Bare Naked Ladies, Gordon. Okay, 1993. In 1993, I got a lot of gotta mentions here. A couple of them are box sets. Here, CDs have established themselves strongly or solidly enough as the preferred release medium that companies started releasing box sets. And man, I started snapping those things up. And in 1993, we got the release of Message in a Box, the collected police recordings. We got BTO released an anthology that had a couple of unreleased tracks, and it had cuts from albums that I didn't have at the time. So I really liked getting that. The Beach Boys released Good Vibrations, 30 Years of the Beach Boys, which was a stellar box set. Normal albums. Paul McCartney released Off the Ground, which I discovered when I did my Paul McCartney deep dive, and I like that album a lot. Alan Parsons released his first non-Alan Parsons Project album, Try Anything Once. The Kinks released their last studio recording of original material, Phobia. Warren Zevon released Learning to Flinch, good album. And these are all good albums, varying degrees. But as far as album of the year, my third runner-up is Billy Joel's last pop album, River of Dreams, which I think is a much better album than it gets credit for. As far as I'm concerned, spoiler alert if you haven't seen my Billy Joel album ranking video, he really only released 2 dogs. Street Life Serenade and The Bridge. Everything else is, varying degrees of excellent. So, yeah, I like River of Dreams. I think it was a very good album. My second runner-up, Chris Isaak's follow-up to Heart-Shaped World, San Francisco Days. Everything I just said a couple of years ago, I'm not sure why I did that movement. Everything I said a couple of years ago about Heart-Shaped World applies in spades to San Francisco Days. My first runner-up, John Mellencamp's Human Wheels. Mostly for the song, it's the title track, Human Wheels. Oh my God, is that a great song. But my album of the year, an artist who has won a previous album of the year recognition for his first solo release. This was the year that saw Donald Fagen's second solo release, Kamakiriad. And I'll be honest with you, as much as I loved The Nightfly, I think I like this one better. I like the songwriting on this one better. I like the sound of this one a little bit better. The Nightfly was produced by Gary Katz, which is why it sounds like Steely Dan. This one was produced by Walter Becker, his Steely Dan partner, which is why it sounds like Steely Dan and then some. So I like Kamakiriad a lot. Fantastic album. And it's my album of the year, 1993. Which gets us to 1994, the final year for this episode. Gotta mentions include John Mellencamp's Dance Naked, Tom Petty's Wildflowers, Brian Setzer Orchestra's self-titled debut, the Eagles with Hell Freezes Over. You're not going to get a whole lot of Eagles love from me on these things because while I don't despise the Eagles, I'm not a huge fan, but Hell Freezes Over made a big splash, so we got to talk about it. If you're looking for a good reason or a good entree into the work of one of my favorite artists that I've been talking about in this episode, Chris Rea, this is the year that he released The Best of Chris Rea, which is a very good greatest hits compilation. But if we're talking about album of the year, my third runner-up, I mentioned him a few years ago. I love the David Gilmour Pink Floyd era. So yeah, I like The Division Bell. It's my third runner-up. My second runner-up, one of these albums that I talked about this when I was talking about Paul McCartney albums in my Paul McCartney album ranking. There are certain albums that I think of that when I think of them, when I remember them, when I reflect back on them, I think that they are much better than they actually are if I listen to them again. And that's because when I listen to them again, there are a couple of songs that I'll skip over. And there's a little bit of that going on with Joe Jackson's Night Music from 1994. Overall, I think this is a wonderful album. The songs themselves are, it's night music, right? That's the name of the thing. And he's writing an album of music to listen to at night. And that means he's got, I think, 3 nocturnes, creatively titled Nocturnes number 1, number 2, and number 3. And they tend to blend together a little bit. I'm not saying they're bad, but I tend to skip over them just because I want to get to the next stuff. But as far as the non-nocturne songs, there is some wonderful, wonderful stuff on here, including the man who wrote Danny Boy, which is just may possibly be the best song he ever wrote. I love much of, if not most of, Joe Jackson's Night Music. That's why it's my second runner-up. My first runner-up is, I was just talking about him a couple of years ago, Bare Naked Ladies with their follow-up album, Maybe You Should Drive, which is a little bit glossier version of the kind of stuff they did on Gordon. And I really like Maybe You Should Drive a lot. But my album of the year, what the hell? Donald Fagen got it last year, so let's give it to Walter Becker this year. 1994, he released his first solo album, 11 Tracks of Whack. He produced Kamakiriad for Donald Fagen. Well, Donald Fagen returned the favor. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker produced 11 Tracks of Whack. And when you're listening to these albums back to back, you get a sense of who was responsible for what in the Steely Dan lyric canon. Obsession with the future versus obsession with skeevy characters. But they're both wonderful albums. I really like Kamakiriad, but 11 Tracks of Whack is beautiful. Beautiful album. And we get to listen to Walter Becker sing throughout the whole thing. And he was I thought, a surprisingly good singer. So, well worth your listen if you've not listened to 11 Tracks of Whack. And those are my albums of the year for the years 1984 or 85 to 1994. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Drop that comment down below. I always love hearing from you. Particularly would enjoy your nominations for album of the year if you're trying to establish your musical taste. You know, this is a conversation. I'm not the only one doing talking here, although it usually seems like that. Thanks for hanging around with me today. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you click the like button. While you're down there clicking, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and click the subscribe button. It costs you nothing but means the world to me, so I very much appreciate it. And like I said a second ago, thanks for hanging out with me today. And I hope that the rest of your day is invigorating. See you soon.